Welcome back. We are discussing about the human skeleton system, and human skeleton system we discuss about the skull. So now in axial skeletal system we are now discuss about the bottom of the skull, and that is our vertebral column. So let's see that what are there in our vertebral column. So here this is our vertebral column, and in this vertebral column we have the structure which are individually lining the vertebral column. So the whole vertebral column, if we see in the vertebral column, in the top area we have this neck region. The vertebra is called cervical vertebra. Just below the cervical vertebra we have certain areas that is giving attachment to these ribs, and this area is called thorax, and the vertebra are called thoracic vertebra. So thoracic vertebra are nothing but the vertebrae which are giving attachment to the ribs, and just below the thoracic vertebra we have this area which is called lumbar. So lumbar are the area that is giving the wall of the abdomen, the back side, and then in just below the lumbar we have this area which is called sacrum, and just below the sacrum we have coccyx, or sometimes these are called as coccygeal vertebra. So these are also called as, coccyx is also called as coccygeal vertebrae. So basically these are all the root word of the vertebra, and let's see once again we will try to discuss here in the vertebral column. So we have in the top, in the neck region we have cervical. So the individual, the whole area is called vertebral column, and the individual bone is called vertebrae. So we have vertebrae, and then the whole column is vertebral column. Now what is the importance of this vertebral column is lying in the fact that the area in between the center of this vertebral column is hollow, and this hollow column is giving access to our spinal cord. So suppose this is rough, a kind of one vertebra. So this is the area which is in the center. So this center area is what is giving passage to this spinal cord. So this whole spinal cord is passing through this central cavity, and because of this region, this area is very important. This is giving protection to the spinal cord. So this vertebra is divided, what we have discussed, as cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral and caudal. So these are the 5 distinct areas where we are dividing this cervical this vertebra. So this cervical vertebra is very constant. Most of the time this is 7 in number, and this number is very constant, and in most of the vertebrate species, barring few exceptions. The first cervical vertebra is called atlas. So the first vertebra is called atlas, second vertebra is called axis. So these 2 vertebra are the top vertebra on the top area. These are the 2 vertebral top of the vertebral column. First one is called atlas and the second one is called axis. This atlas and axis is giving a very important kind of a structure in the human body that is helping our neck to rotate. So we will discuss about these joints available in this area and how this axis and atlas rotation is linking to our movement of the upper skull region. So our movement of the skull is nicely coordinated by this atlas and axis vertebrae. This atlas is attached to our top area of the skull, which we have discussed in the last class, occipital condyle. So occipital condyle are the bones which are lying in the both sides. So 2 occipital condyles are giving attachment to this whole vertebral column. So, this is kind of attachment point. So, in the top you have occipital condyle and in the bottom you have first vertebra, and that is atlas, and just below atlas you have axis, and this area is what is giving and movement to our neck region, particularly head region. So, now since we are discussing about the number, so we have cervical, as I discussed, 7 in number. We will see thoracic vertebra, these are again 12 in number, lumbar is 5 and sacral 1, coccygeal is 1 in number. So, they are having distinct vertebral column, and this distinct vertebra in column wise. So, you have cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral and caudal 7, 12, 5, 1, 1. So, these are distinctly divided into an area, and particularly important aspect about this vertebral column, this thoracic vertebra is giving attachment to ribs. So, we have 12 thoracic vertebra and we have ribs attachment towards this thoracic vertebra. So, we will see this vertebral column in detail later on, but now for time being we have to understand why this is important, because this is giving passage to the and protection to the spinal cord and then attachment to the rib, because these all vertebral column is located in the dorsal side, not in the ventral side. So, one has to remember exactly the location. So, these are located in the dorsal side, not in the ventral side, and in the ventral you have this bone which is called sternum. So, ventral is the location of sternum and dorsal is the location of this vertebral column. So, all right, we finished the part related to the vertebral column, and we saw that all different vertebrae associated with the vertebral column. Now, the important aspect of this thoracic vertebra is that this thoracic vertebrae, the individual vertebrae of thoracic region is giving attachment to ribs. So, we have 12 pairs of ribs. So, let us delete this part and we will see the ribs. So, we will discuss ribs. Now, in this rib, total 12 pairs of ribs. So, we have 12 pairs of rib. Now, 12 pairs, the first 7 pairs. So, 7 pairs are actually attached to the vertebra or individual vertebrae. So, these 7 pairs are attaching to the vertebra. That is why they are called as true, because they are actually associated with the ribs. So, the actual ribs are associated with the vertebral column. Now, as we see that these are the thoracic cavity. So, these are the ribs, individual ribs are there in your chest cavity. So, 7 pairs are attached to the thoracic vertebra and they are true. The next 3, 8, 9 and 10, these 3 pairs are not attached directly to the thoracic vertebra, but attached to the 7th one. So, they are attached to the 7th rib as such. So, these 3 pairs of the ribs are not called as the true ribs, but they are called as false rib. So, the 8th, 9th and the 10th one, the 10th rib is attached to the 7th pairs, and that is why they are called as false ribs. The last 2 pairs, 11th and 12th, are kind of floating, that is why they are called as floating ribs. Floating ribs. So, there are 3 kinds of rib: true, false and floating, depend upon their attachment to the vertebra or to themselves or not attached to anything. So, this is our cage like the chest cavity, and these the ventral area, this ventral portion is what you call sternum, and in the dorsal, so this is what you have vertebral column, vertebral column. So, this vertebral column is basically on the dorsal side and the sternum is there in the ventral side, and these are the individual ribs. And so if you look into the first 7, these are attached to the actual vertebral column. So that's why they are called as true. While the other 3, the 8th, 9th and the 10th one are kind of attached to the 7th one. So that's why they are called as false. While the last 2 are kind of floating. So that's why they are called floating. So 11th and 12th. So these 2 ribs are floating. So just to summarize, this is very important in order to understand the framework of this chest cavity. So we have all the ribs lying around the chest cavity. Some are attached, some are not attached. So accordingly, we are calling this one as true, false and floating. So we have now a clear-cut understanding of this vertebral column, ribs, sternum and skull. So the axial skeleton is over, and we have discussed earlier that we have total 206 bones in our body. Out of 206 bones, we are having 80 as total axial, and rest 126 what we have is called appendicular. So we have this appendicular left out. So we will now discuss about the appendicular skeleton system. So let's delete and try to focus on the appendicular side. Before discussing this appendicular, let's try to see and look and understand the basic aspect of this appendicular. So this is our forehand, or otherwise you can simply call it upper arm, and the bottom leg is what you call the lower arm or the lower limb. Simply you can call upper arm, lower limb. This total 2 pairs of appendicular areas are what is constituting total appendicular skeleton. In total, there are 30 bones. So 30 bones in each hand and each leg. So, in total we have 120 bones, and in addition we have other small bones, bony areas and all. Now, if you see the complete hand, this is attached here. So this is the attachment area for this forearm, and this is the attachment area for our lower limb. So this whole area is giving attachment to the limb, and this is giving attachment to our forearm. So the forearm is attached to a structure which is called pectoral girdle. Pectoral girdle. So simple we are calling girdle. And the bottom, the bottom area is what is called pelvic girdle. So you have pectoral girdle giving attachment to the forearm, and you have pelvic girdle giving attachment to the legs or limb. Now, this pectoral girdle comprises of 2 distinct bones. One is called clavicle, and the second is called scapula. So clavicle and scapula are the 2 bones in the pectoral girdle giving attachment to this bony structure forearm, while the pelvic girdle, which is there in the hip region, is ilium, ischium and pubis. So these are the 3 bony structure there in the lower part of the body, making pelvic girdle giving attachment to the lower limb, the limb area actually. So we will see one by one in the diagrammatic form, and we will see some of the bony structure. So we have this long bone here, we have some bones here, we have something here, we have something here. So these are all bony framework. So if we start, this is long bone. So this is pectoral girdle, and then once we will understand here, then we will try to see in the slide form. So we have pectoral girdle, we have this collarbone, and this collarbone is what we call clavicle, and then you have a scapula. And there after this you have this bone which is called humerus, then you have radius and ulna. So there are two bones here, radius and ulna, and then we have carpals, then we have this area called metacarpals, and then we have phalanges. So we have one phalanges, metacarpal, then you have this area which is called which are having carpals bone, then you have radius and ulna, then you have humerus. Similarly, in the bottom, in the leg region, you have this hip joint that is having ilium, ischium and pubis. Ilium, ischium and pubis, apart from ilium, ischium and pubis, you have this bone which is the longest bone in the body and called femur. So the femur is the top area, and then in the bottom you have tibia and fibula, and after tibia and fibula you have tarsals, metatarsals and phalanges. So we will see in the diagrammatic form what is there individually in the slide form. So let's see and go to the slide here. So here is the forearm. So if you see in the forearm, you have this area where you have clavicle, and here you have scapula. So this is what you have, pectoral girdle, and these are in the pair. So you have the similar kind of structure in the other side also. And then you have this bone, it's a long bone, it's called humerus. And then you have the two bones here, one is called radius and one is called ulna. So this is called radius and this is called ulna. Then you have this area which is basically called carpals. Then here this area you call metacarpals. And then you have this area called phalanges. So basically this is what you call forearm, and this forearm is in the duplicate. So this whole area is what you have is like a bony framework. So this whole forearm is what is giving the first framework of appendicular skeleton. So we have 30 bones here, multiplied by 2, we have 60 bones in the forearm. So let's move on to our next the bottom, and that is this area is what you call pelvic girdle. Now this pelvic girdle, here we have this bone which is called ilium. Then you have this bone called ischium, and then you have this area called pubis. Now just to give a brief idea to the students here, so what you have this name ilium. So this is ilium. You have this ilium is a bone in the pelvic girdle. If you change the spelling like ilium, this ilium is what you have the part of small intestine. So intestine, the small intestine part should not be confused with the bony structure in the pelvic girdle. So this is ilium, this is also ilium, but here it is ILEUM. This is a part of a small intestine. So it's a small intestine part is also called ilium, while this part is this spelling, this ilium is what you have the part of pelvic girdle. So just keep these two name in your mind, not to confuse, because it's always very similar, pronunciation is also similar, so one has to take care of these two form. So let's go back in the slide again. So we have these three bones which are there in the pelvic girdle, and then we have this longest bone in the body, we called it femur. And then there is a small bone in the lining of this, so this is tibia, and the back side of tibia is what you have, fibula. And then this area, as what we have discussed in the forearm, we have we call it carpal, this is called tarsals. Here we have same metatarsal, and then in the last we have phalanges. So, this is pretty much like similar like forearm, but here we are calling it tarsal, metatarsals and phalanges. There in the forearm we are calling carpals, metacarpals and phalanges. While in here you have tibia and fibula, and in between tibia and fibula we have this small bony structure which is kind of a floating bone, and that is called patella. So, this patella, we will now discuss about this patella, why it is important, and how this is forming a very important joint in human body. So, this is all about the appendicular skeleton. We are not going to discuss much about this aspect, but one has to understand that these are the bony framework, and in the next slide let us summarize the whole story and just wrap up the whole aspect of this axial and appendicular skeleton. So, the bones what we have discussed now in a couple of lectures that we have: cranial, facial, vertebral column, ribs, upper limb, lower limb, and in total we are getting 206 bones in human body. So, this is about the number aspect of this bony structure what we have discussed now. Let us move on to very important aspect of this bony framework, and that is joint. So, let us see what we are now going to discuss is joints. So, these joints are very important because you can't do movement if you don't have joints intact. So, and in any deviation, any bone, if you have any broken bone or something, we call it fractures. So, these bones are very important to make a framework of the human body and all. And similarly, what we are now going to discuss is joints. So, these joints are very important in order to do articulation, kind of movement. That is what we are discussing in this whole chapter. That each and every part of the human body is kind of having some sort of joint, because bones are not regular. So, we have small bones. So, for example, we will just give an example and then we will see what is there. So, this is skull. So, these bones are flat in nature. So, these flat bones are joined to each other, and now these joints are such a way that they are not moving, right. What just imagine if you have movement in the skull, you have this skull very flexible, you do not want to do that. So, what is there? This whole bone is very fixed. So, this kind of joint is also there in that head region. So, your whole flat bones which are there. So, suppose this is what we discuss in the skull region. This is frontal and this is parietal and this is occipital. So, frontal, parietal and occipital, these are the flat bones. Each other, they are just merging to each other with the help of some kind of joints, not moving. Second, what we discussed, that we have some sort of movement, and this movement is our jaw movement, the mandible. This bone is mandible. Secondly, we have arms here. So, we have, now there are two kinds of movement here, just try to see here. So, we have complete flexibility here. So, this is giving complete flexibility, while there is another joint here that is giving some sort of hindrance. So, we can give this kind of movement, but we can't go beyond this. So, there is some sort of hinge here. So, these joints are divided into different types based on their location, based on their types and based on what they are doing. Similarly, the next example is our vertebral column. What we saw in the vertebral column, that our vertebral column is having some sort of cartilage in between. So, cartilage is kind of cementing material in between. So, this joints are also having some sort of flexibility. Like, see, there are quite bit of flexibility here, right? Not much, but we have little bit flexibility. Not like this, but we have slight flexibility in our vertebral column also. Now, because of this little bit of the movement, these are all different types of joints. So, we have three distinct kinds of joints. One is called fibrous, the second is called cartilaginous, and the third one is called synovial. So, fibrous, cartilaginous and synovial, these are the three distinct kind of joints, classification of joints one can say in the human body. So, if you see what is fibrous, so just imagine our skull what we discussed, we have this attachment areas. This is kind of attachment areas. This is what is forming the complete skull region. So this whole area is what you call the fibrous joint. Now these joints are very important because they are immovable. They are not moving. They are fixed. So they are fixed. They are not moving, and sometimes they are called sutures. So these are sutures. So basically these are stitching kind of appearance in the skull region. So this is important. This is one such joint where the movement is not there. The second joint what we have discussed in some examples, that we have this bony framework where we have this cartilaginous joint, where the cartilage is involved in doing some little or the minor movements. So this is another example of this cartilaginous joint. So cartilaginous joint is also a very important kind of joint in human body pertaining to vertebral column. So these are some examples giving slight flexibility to the system. Next is you have the large group of joints, and that is called synovial joint. And what I am depicting here is the region which we have just now discussed in our limb region, that this one is your femur. So this is tibia, and then you have this bone called patella. Now this whole bony area this is just example, and then I will try to discuss now with some other examples also. So this whole area is having certain kind of this fluidic region. This is called synovial fluid. So this fluid region is called synovial fluid. Now this fluid is kind of giving lubrication to the whole joint, and this region is what is making in human body what we call the knee joint. The knee joint is what is formed by this three bony structure which is there in close association in the fluid fluid that is caused kind of giving lubrication to this bony structure, and that is synovial fluid. Now let's try to see some of the related synovial joints in our body. So we can nicely classify synovial joints. So other fibrous and cartilaginous we are not going to discuss, but synovial is a large group of joints. So we will discuss now the synovial joint. Synovial joints. So let's start one by one and then we'll see. In the vertebral column we discussed that we have first vertebra called atlas and the second vertebra is called axis. Now axis and atlas, these two vertebrae are joined by a synovial joint. So this synovial joint is a very unique, and we called it pivot joint. So this is a very unique example that is giving movement to our neck region. Because of this turning we are getting a kind of movement. So this is in the axis and atlas. This is also a type of synovial joint, but the movement is limited. Next we called that complete rotation. Now see this example, we have complete area where we have complete rotation here. So this area, the humerus and this pectoral girdle, so this area is having this kind of joint that is giving complete movement. This movement is called ball and socket. Ball and socket. So this is ball and socket joint. This is a type of synovial joint, but this is complete movement. The second is next in this one. So this is what you have, this shoulder region. Now you have this elbow. Here you have the problem. You can't do flexibility in the back side. So you can do movement like this, but you can't do in the back side because there is a bony hindrance in the back side of your arm. Now this is called hinge because the movement is not hinge joint. So you called it hinge because the complete movement is not there. Next one is So this kind of hinge joint is here in the knees also. So you have knee joint as a hinge joint also, because in the patella what we have discussed now is also a hinge joint. So you have ball and socket both in pectoral girdle as well as in the pelvic girdle. So we have hip joint and the shoulder joint. These two are the example of ball and socket. While hinge joint, the best example is elbow joint and the knee joint. So we have elbow and knee. These are the two hinge joint in our body. There are many other examples also. I am just giving the best possible match for these three joints as such. Next, we have some joints here. This is kind of gliding. So the complete area is kind of gliding. If you see this area, this is completely gliding. So this is just a movement of this carpals. In between carpals you have complete movement. So this is called gliding joints. Gliding. So complete movement here also, and in the leg also you have tarsal areas. So those areas are having all small bones which are kind of gliding with each other. And the last one, we have the area in the phalanges. So this is kind of movement that is giving in the individual phalanges also, and in the metacarpals also. This is the area which is giving limited movement and all. This is called saddle. Saddle joint. First joint, pivot, then ball and socket, hinge, gliding and saddle. So these are the 5 examples of the synovial joint. So after discussing these synovial joints, we have to understand some conditions, some important kind of disease related aspect related to these joints. So let's see some important problems associated with joints. So our joints, as I said, is very important, and any problem in the joints can lead to various complications and all. There are many problems associated with the joints. Sometimes what is happening, the joints, suppose you have one bone here and then you have another bone here. Now this area is sometime getting inflammation. Inflammation is a sometime kind of a problem where this whole area is getting some sort of disturbances. A lot of cells are coming, some immune cells are coming, and because of this region, this whole area is getting painful. And also there are some accumulation of the cells, WBCs and other kind of inflammatory cells coming in this side. The problem, the associated aspect is called inflammation. Inflammation. So inflammation is nothing but a problem associated to the infiltration of inflammatory cells. That is, the body immune cells are coming in the side in order to nullify the effect. And because of this region, the whole joints are getting pain and other kind of disturbances. Inflammation of joints is called arthritis. Arthritis. So arthritis is a very unique condition associated with the joints. Now, as I say, the joints are very important, and sometimes if your drainage system is not good, then your excretory products will get accumulated in different parts of the body, and one such part is joints. So suppose you have lot of different kind of excretory product, and one such excretory product is uric acid. Now this uric acid is very toxic to our body. Now this uric acid, if this uric acid is getting accumulated in the body, particularly in the joints, so suppose in this joints area, if this uric acid is getting accumulated, you are getting a condition which is very painful condition in human body, and that is called gout. So gout is nothing but the deposition of uric acid crystals, the crystal form of uric acid in the joints. while the inflammation of joints is called arthritis. So, these two terminologies are very commonly used in case of joints, the problem associated with the joints, and then there are a lot of regions behind this. I am just discussing what is happening here in terms of the gross picture of this one. So, these are some related aspect for the joints. There is another way people are asking in human body, that what are the different kinds of movement, what are the different kinds of movements available in the human body. So, let us delete this part, because we are getting very close to finishing this chapter, locomotion and movement, and to finish this chapter we need to understand some of the things which we have not covered in the chapter, and one such thing is the types of movement in our body. So, if you divide the whole movement available in our body, we can divide nicely into three forms. So, we have first form that is available in the lymphocyte, leukocyte, or some other cells, the immune cells of the body. Now, what is happening to those immune cells, that these cells are having some sort of this kind of irregular appearance in their outer surface. The plasma membrane is forming what you call pseudopodia, and they are kind of moving into this into different body fluids or in body cavity in the form of same like what we have discussed in amoeba. So, these are similarly called as amoeboid movement. So, they are amoeboid movement. So, amoeboid movement is the first example where the cell, suppose this is the nucleus and this is one such example, this I draw, the cells is called macrophages. So, macrophages are the cell that can eat the small outside particle or outside ingredients which are not at all required by the human body or which are harmful to the human body. Say for example, bacteria. If the bacteria is coming, then they can go or they will go towards the site of the bacteria entry with the help of this pseudopodia, and they can just flip around by the movement called amoeboid movement, catch hold the particle and engulf it and destroy the particle, right. So, these are very important cells in the human body, the immune cells which are doing amoeboid movement. The second is what you call ciliary movement. Ciliary movement. Now, the ciliary movement is available in those areas in our human body where you have passage, the ciliated epithelium. So, basically you have the cells. So, this is the lining suppose, and they have small ciliated cilia. So, this is cilia. So, these are giving kind of passage, the movement to the air or to the particles, to the food particles or other thing. So, this kind of movement is also there. So, this is called ciliary movement. So, ciliary movement is also a unique form of movement available in human body. And the third one is muscular movement. Muscular. So, muscular movement is what we discussed now in our whole skeleton system, that muscle is associated with a movement of the bones and then other aspect where the muscles is actually involved in doing the movement. So, we have three distinct movement. One is amoeboid movement, just for your knowledge, because this is not a very vast topic to discuss, but we should know that what are the three movements available in the human body. So, we have amoeboid movement available in some of the immune cells, some of the leukocytes, some of the WBCs. We can give an example of WBC, white blood cells. We are also having some immune cells. Then we have ciliated epithelium that is located also in the respiratory tract. Also, you have lot of cilia which is giving passage to the air. So, they are trapping the dust particle, and with the help of mucus. So, this whole ciliated epithelium is kind of giving a passage to the air, and also in the intestine you have a lot of ciliated epithelium that is kind of involved in absorption and movement of the food particle towards the forward direction. So, this ciliated epithelium is very important. So, ciliated movement is also very important aspect in human body. And the third one and the last one is muscular movement, which is nothing but the muscle involved movement. Whatever we are walking or whatever we are doing is because of this involvement of muscle, and any deviation in the muscular problem and other thing will lead to the problem in our movement, our locomotion and all, because we are changing the movement because of the muscle movement. So, if we can't do the movement, we will have a lot of problems. So, that's all about the whole topic of this locomotion and movement. One more thing we would like to discuss here is the differences between the cardiac muscle and the skeletal muscle. So, let's see and discuss a little bit about, because this is important. So, we have skeletal muscle, and then we have cardiac muscle. Now, skeletal muscle, we saw that skeletal muscle is having a complete muscle fiber, myofibril and all, but they don't have branches. So, branching is absent. But here we have branches. So, branches in terms of, like, we have this kind of, then again we have another, and then you have again having branching pattern in the cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle is one which is supplying to the heart. So, heart muscle is what you call cardiac muscle. So, we have branching pattern. There is a very unique aspect about this cardiac muscle. Now, in skeletal muscle, that is absent. So, we have this intercalated disc. So, intercalated disc is present in cardiac muscle. We call it intercalated disc. So, intercalated disc. So, intercalated disc is present in cardiac muscle while it is absent in case of skeletal muscle. One can nicely do differentiation also, that skeletal muscle is voluntary while cardiac muscle is involuntary in nature. So, they are not under our control. There is always a question associated with how you can differentiate a cardiac muscle with the skeletal muscle. So, one should know that there is a branching pattern and also intercalated discs are present in cardiac muscle, not in skeletal muscle. So, that's all for now. That's all about the whole topic of this locomotion and movement.